if I think about my experience taking over leadership of a church in kind of really tumultuous times, and then that going into a pandemic, which was a tumultuous time for everybody, what is true is in all of that, there were a lot of really serious problems around. And what I can say, honestly, is in all of that, my biggest problem was me. Like, my biggest challenge was that I felt the lack, I felt the absence, I felt the insufficiency of my knowledge, of my character. And when you're in that kind of place, the only response is to ask God for help.
Yeah, I come from 5 kids, so mowing the lawn was like on me.
Yeah.
I don't know why, like, I didn't love doing it.
Yeah.
So it was like, I don't know why I didn't, like, why isn't Brad or Zach doing it? Like, they're big enough.
So no, y'all didn't take turns?
No, that was always my job. It was always my thing. And yeah, weeding and edging. And I mean, all that from probably like 7 or 8, that was my deal.
Because you have 2 brothers, right?
I have 3 brothers.
3 brothers.
Yeah, one was quite a bit younger, so that really didn't fall on him. But yeah, it was something that I don't know why, that was just my deal.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I had 3 brothers, so we just rotated through. My dad would, and my dad would even jump in, which was cool. You know, he'd mow, we'd weed eat, the other one would blow or sweep. You know, so we'd kind of rotate through. But there really
that would make sense to work together on that, but it was like no solo. Like, you know, Zach, your job is this, Brad, your job is that. Go do those things, and it was like, well, or we could just all do it together.
Yeah. But there really is something about it. Not to take mowing so deep, but there really is something about doing it yourself.
Yeah.
And the lessons you can teach, and like you said, working together, and not that like we had this crazy strong relationship because we mowed together, but
yeah, but I mean, I would say though, like, I do remember the times like my dad showed me, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's okay. You've got an engine, you've got a machine that you've got to take care of so that it functions for you, and then 2, you've got to learn how it works. I mean, there's just skills in that are just you pick up from that you don't really necessarily see immediately.
And you remember the mistakes,
yes.
Right? Like, I remember I put the lawnmower gas in the weed eater, and obviously it
2-stroke
takes different. Yeah. And it's just like there's a lesson in there.
Yeah.
You know, that thing just starts making noise and shaking. And
now that you're a dad, that's a lesson you don't want your kid to have to learn.
Exactly. Right. Yes.
Exactly. Are you kidding me?
You know, another mistake I made, it was St. Augustine Grass. I'll never forget this. That's the thicker.
The thick.
Thick it's
blades,
great.
Yeah.
It looks great when it's mowed.
Yeah.
But I mowed it one time, and I was actually, my job, I was actually helping, you know, me and my buddy started this little mini business mowing lawns, and a yard we were mowing had that grass. And so I'm going through, and I get done and thinking I did a great job, and I look back, and there's little thin strips all the way down that weren't mowed. And what I realized was my tire was going over that. I didn't overlap enough.
Oh,
Yeah.
And so I get done with it, and it just looks horrible. So I had to go back and redo it all again. So that's another
your
mistake
first
I made.
Job?
Yes. Yep.
Was it yours?
It was.
Like a side
I never got paid for mowing lawns.
Okay.
My first job, I worked at like a event venue at
You worked at American Eagle? you sprayed cologne?
Yeah, at 12, I took my shirt off and just sprayed cologne.
That's awesome.
All right, so I know we're kind of on a tangent here, but welcome to the One Shot Podcast. I'm really excited about today, but to just recap, the last 2 weeks, we have gone through a book called The Wisdom Pyramid, and talked through the challenges we're facing in society when it comes to acquiring and leaning into wisdom. You know, we have a ton of challenges, this age of information overload. How do we process it? How do we know what's true? Last episode, we talked about what that pyramid looks like, what the foundation needs to be, right? The only book in history that has proven to be true, you know, over almost 2,000 years, right? And so, you know, that being the foundation, and then working up from there. And and recognizing too, like we're in an age where we have access to information, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing. But what do you do with it? And then how do you process it? And how do you filter those sources? But again, today, like I said, I'm really excited. A dear friend of mine and Tiffany's is joining us. And the reason we wanted to have him on,
because he's wise and we're not.
That's thanks for summing it up. I'm very long-winded. That's pretty much it. No, but so we've got Jamin Roller here, who is one of the pastors at Citizens Church in Plano, Texas, and Jamin has walked through a ton of things with Tiffany and I, some really hard things, some great things. Walked through with us, and man, he has been just a light of wisdom. And Jamin's actually younger than me, which makes me feel really sad. The amount of wisdom that this man has, and then the lack that I have. But anything that I think, okay, hey, look, I need some guidance when it comes to life. That I need it to be truthful. I need it to be honest. I need it to be logical. And I need it to have, God as the foundation of it. Like, this is the man that I go to and lean on. So Jamin, man, I appreciate you spending some time with us this morning and just, dropping some knowledge bombs. So here's one thing that I do promise. Jamin, the reason I also brought him in is because he's just going to give you the answers to life that you know. He knows everything. So whatever he said, I'm just
setting
kidding.
You up there.
A lot of pressure.
Prepare to be disappointed.
That's part of wisdom, is learning to handle disappointment.
That's right. Yes.
But man, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
So just so we can run through, so they can get to know you a little bit. Let's just talk quickly through, your upbringing.
Yeah.
You're Texas native, but talk through your family dynamic, because there's some things that caused you to grow up maybe faster.
Yeah.
Than your everyday person.
Yeah. So thanks for having me. Really, It's an honor, and those kind words. I feel the pressure now. So here we go. I grew up in the DFW area. My dad started pastoring a church in Duncanville the year I was born. So he's been a pastor my whole life, pretty much. And he's pastored just a small church down there next to Lakeside Park. And I am the third of 4 children. And my little brother, my youngest brother, was born with a birth defect called spina bifida. And he's been paralyzed from the waist down his whole life. And so childhood looked a lot like in church, at home, or at the hospital. And so it was a really, if I think about kind of having a front row seat to just some of the more hard realities of life, that started at a really young age. And then, but life our home was great. My mom and dad loved the Lord. My dad is an incredibly wise man. My mom is an incredibly wise woman. Childhood wasn't without its challenges. There was a season there where there was just a lot of suffering, a lot of difficult things that happened. My dad ended up getting out of ministry for about 3 or 4 years just to get the home healthy, and there's a lot tied up in that. But yeah, because I saw in our home mom and dad and brother suffer really, and go through difficult things, and I saw that the only thing that truly sustained was Jesus, really. And being a part of a community that really loved us. My affection for God, my affection for the church, my affection for the Word of God just kind of grew at a really young age. And obviously the Lord, saved me when I was a young child, forgave me of my sins, and He's been faithful to me ever since. And so kind of late high school, it's a really unusual story, but like late high school, I knew I wanted to be a pastor, which really isn't like the fun thing to talk about in the locker room, but I knew that's what God had for me. I was confused about it for a little bit, but yeah, at a really young age, went to Bible college and then started ministry pretty much right when I turned 20, and so I've been in ministry, which was last year. Just kidding. Yeah. That was about 16 years ago. So yeah, and then met my wife right around that time, right out of high school we met, and dated for a few years and then married young and got into ministry. And the church that I'm at now, Citizens in Plano, it used to be a campus of a larger church called The Village, which is in Flower Mound. And I've been on staff there. It'll be 9 years in a few months. We, a couple years ago, became our own church. And that was August of 2019. And then we've been a church for about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And it's been really easy. That's not true.
No.
I was just going to ask, August of 19, before the world goes crazy, which it's always been crazy before it really goes crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about...
I would say the pandemic was more of just a wrinkle, like, through that. Like,
well,
when he said it wasn't easy, like, there was other things, right? That, and this is kind of what I want to kick off this wisdom is when I see, and I was watching Jamin and his team. And when you talk, look, everybody can have the answer. Everybody can say, oh, hey, this is what you need to do, and this is what this means. And everybody is that, right? But when you watch someone just live out patience, obedience, live out faith, still live with hope in like the most tumultuous, hard times ever, that to me is a reflection of what wisdom is. Because again, you can say all these things, and that's what we do. We're a culture that wants to talk, and I've got this motivational Instagram post, and I've got this, and I've got that. But like to actually walk through trials and be able to watch someone walk through that faithfully and selflessly when it is really hard personally, really, really hard. That to me, I'm like, gosh, those are the people that like I'm drawn to and want to be around. So, I mean, maybe talk through the transition a little bit. You don't have to get into a ton of details, but, talk through that and what your perspective was through those times. And, again, you're here sharing, but like also it's okay that you didn't know at the time.
Yeah. I think that it was, so if you think about any sort of leadership, whether that's you're leading in a business, whether that's you're leading in a home, or whether that's you're leading in a church, I think that there's you lead out of your person, you lead out of who you are. And so your leadership requires a kind of character, and it requires a kind of depth of person. I have a mentor who describes it this way. He talks about how when they build skyscrapers in New York, I think specifically maybe Manhattan, part of just like the engineering, and he might be wrong about this, so don't fact check.
So any contractors or engineers out there?
I mean, if somebody's
feel free to poke holes.
But basically the idea is however tall the building's going to be, it has to be twice as deep. So it has steel kind of, steel rods, whatever, that go into the foundation. And however tall it's going to be, it has to be twice as deep into the ground to be able to sustain what's happening above the surface, right? And he said leadership, really just life is the same way. However large your outer life has gotten, and that includes marriage. When you get married, your life grows larger. When you have kids, your life grows larger. If you have any sort of responsibility in any sort of company or business or church or anything like that, your life has grown large. And however large that is, what it requires, more than it requires having the right answers, more than it requires having a great strategy, it really requires a depth of person that's, I don't know if it's twice as deep, right? But it definitely needs to be deeper, or your life will fall over. And that's why what you see a lot of is when people get their life expands and they have a lot of responsibility, and with that responsibility comes stress and it comes conflict. Why you see a lot of public figures, their life just falls over, is because it got larger than what really their soul could sustain. And I think and maybe this isn't the answer to your question, but if I think about my experience taking over leadership of a church in kind of really tumultuous times, and then that going into a pandemic, which was a tumultuous time for everybody. What is true is in all of that, there were a lot of really serious problems around. And what I can say honestly is in all of that, my biggest problem was me. Like my biggest challenge was that I felt the lack, I felt the absence, I felt the insufficiency of my knowledge, of my character. And when you're in that kind of place, the only response is to ask God for help.
Yeah.
I mean, just to lean on Jesus to help sustain you. And I really do think that it would be easy to think that, wisdom is about maybe coming to a place where you have answers, you always know the right thing to do. And I think especially when we read Proverbs where we're in now, Proverbs 3 says, lean not on your own understanding, in all of your ways trust in God. Be not wise in your own eyes, but fear the Lord. That was actually a jumbling of a bunch of different verses in Proverbs. But anyway, they're in there. And so I think that the idea is there has to be an honest assessment of your own limits and your own weakness and what you need to know. And when we talk about wisdom at our church, we say that wisdom has a posture and it's low. Wisdom is the posture of wisdom is humility, and people do not grow wise with like a puffed up chest standing tall on their feet. People grow wise on the ground. And I think that my experience of wisdom, God has entrusted me with responsibility that is too much for me. And because it's been too much, it's put me on the ground, and that's where I found him. That's where I've grown with him. And the option is to either fake it and crumble or be honest, and God will meet you. And that's been my experience.
Gosh. And that is, that thought process, right? That humility, I just feel is so lost because we live through this filter where we have to have it all together. We have to, look like we know what we're talking about. Our family is great. It's all this, but you're exactly right. If it's not there, if the foundation, if the, let's call it piers of the building aren't strong enough to sustain it, I mean, we're just adding so much to our lives so fast.
Yeah.
It's impossible to keep up. And, I know Ben and I, we talk about this all the time. We talk about this on the show is just, we're three guys that are very transparent about our shortcomings because we don't know it all. I mean, Ben knows everything about fitness, and he says that he's the number one fitness expert on the planet. So, but other than that, we don't, and so I love that you said hey, a posture of wisdom is low. It's humility. Because that's when you listen and learn. If you're busy talking and telling and faking, you're not able to receive any of that knowledge, any of that information, any of that experience.
Yeah.
Talk through maybe today, we want all of the benefits, none of the struggle. Talk through the importance of actually enduring and going through those struggles.
Yeah. So I think one of our challenges right now, just as a culture, is that we're pain avoidant. That we have, if we were to, just kind of summarize all of the messages, whether it's in media or even in our own hearts, if we were to summarize the answer to the question, what makes life matter, or how do you know life's going well, usually the answer would be something that is, it is full of blessing and it is free of pain. It is full of everything that we want is present and none of the things that we don't want are absent. And the problem is we don't live in that world. We can't create that world for ourselves. I think that we live at an interesting time where there are a lot of really good things that humans have created, right? So if you think about the advancements in medicine, you think about the advancements in technology, those things have benefited real people in real ways. But with that, I think there's also been an overconfidence in the kinds of things that humans can actually protect themselves from. Mm-hmm. And so we are smarter in so many ways. We have more information. We have more access to healthcare, and at least where we live, we do. That's not true for everybody, but and yet I think while that's been good, I think the expectation is we have gotten to a place as a society where we can protect ourselves from all the things that we fear, and we can secure for ourselves all the things we want. And when we discover, like everyone will, that that's not true, we don't know what to do with that. And it's I think the expectation of life has been skewed. And so in that, whenever any sort of suffering does come, we automatically think life is failing. And yet, this isn't just true about Christian history. For a lot of world history and a lot of different worldviews, the way to actually become the things that are most valuable in life, the only way to discover and treasure life is through pain and through suffering and through enduring things that, and if you've ever been around someone who has suffered through something and come out the other side and they've suffered well through it, not everyone has suffered well, you realize that you're around someone who has something that's just really rare, you know? So I think part of it would be, I'm not going to expect of life things that I can't control. And I think too, there's just really, this is true for my heart, and this is true in my life, that there's often a discrepancy between what I would say matters most in life and then how I actually spend my time, you know? Like if you were, and I think this is true for a lot of people, if you were to ask someone, hey, what's more important, your job or your kids, you know? Or hey, what's more important, the promotion or being the kind of parent you want to be? Most sane people are like, oh, well, I'll choose my kids, right? That we just kind of instinctively know that. And yet you're rarely ever faced in life where a moment where you have to make that choice, where it's like that stark of a choice. The reality is, instead of faced with that one kind of, you know, stark moment, you're really just faced with all these little small moments throughout your day and throughout your life where you choose one over the other. And what is it that helps you make that choice? What is it that helps you, you know, pursue the thing that you would say? What is it that helps your time align with your actual values? And it's wisdom. But you don't often get that wisdom until suffering has given you that kind of perspective, to where you're willing to let go of some of those things that you would say. No, I think what God does in our lives is God will use pain so that our time will align with our priorities. And with pain, he'll pry those things that we would say aren't most important, but we hold on to like they're most important. He'll pry them out of our hands because he loves us.
Yeah, suffering's, it's so interesting, and it's become something that I've been more fascinated by lately, because I'm okay with certain types of suffering. For me personally, I'm okay with physical suffering. Right? Working out, that's totally cool with me, because I understand that suffering is going to ultimately build me back stronger. But when a certain bill comes in that I wasn't expecting, or, you know, a certain thing happens at work that I didn't expect, for whatever reason, I'm not okay with those sufferings, even though I know more than likely at the end of that, it's going to teach me something. I'm going to learn something. I'm going to come back stronger. So I know that in the back of my head, but it's hard to realize that in the moment.
Totally.
Of the suffering that's okay.
Yeah.
And again, it's weird for me personally that I'm okay with it in some areas of life, but I'm not in others.
Yeah.
And so getting to a place, do you ever get to a place that you mentioned the last few years have been, are you to a place now where you're like, all right, whatever suffering comes my way, I'm cool with it?
Oh, no way.
Okay.
No, I'm at a place now where it's like, in some ways, I paid my dues, you know?
It's like, I did it. We're good now, right?
Which there's a word for that. It's called foolish. It's not wisdom.
Anti-wisdom.
Yeah. I think, but what you said, Ben, is really important. I think that's true for a lot of people, that we can, so maybe somebody listening is like, oh yeah, I'm not afraid of pain because I do tough things. I do difficult things, right? But I think that's most people are comfortable with the pain that they're in charge of. Most people are comfortable with the pain that they control. It's what you described. It's the unexpected, which is mostly what suffering is. There's a Christian author. Her name's Elizabeth Elliott. Her husband, Jim Elliott, was a missionary, and he was killed by the people that he was going to share the gospel with. There's a movie that they made about it called The End of the Spear. It's a wonderful story. Elizabeth Elliott, from there, just became a prolific author. She's really, really smart. She writes on suffering. And what she says is suffering is having what you don't want or wanting what you don't have. And I appreciate that definition because it's really all-encompassing. Everyone knows what that's like, to have what you don't want or to want what you don't have. But there is the kind of suffering that changes you is not the pain that you volunteer for. It's the pain that you didn't see coming, because then so much of wisdom, so much of that wisdom as a posture, it's low. And what is it that humbles you? What humbles you is when you say, I'm not God. I'm not God. I'm not in control of my world. I'm not God. I mean, you just think about all of the decisions that happen in any given day that you would have made differently if you knew everything that God knows. So we know we're limited. We know that we don't have the power, the control. But John Calvin, he's a theologian. He talks about our hearts. He says our hearts are idol-making factories. Yeah. In other words, from inside of us, we just create ways to make this life and to make our world and to make our existence about anything and everything except for God. And namely, that's by trying to take God's place. Yeah. And so I think the lesson is it has to, like that bill comes in, right? And it sucks and you didn't see it coming. But part of what that means is it's the reason why we have the reaction we do is because there's something about our world that felt attacked by that. And that's different than the pain of working out. Nothing about your world felt attacked. Nothing about your world felt threatened. It's when the thing that comes in that you didn't see coming, and it's going after something that we really treasure. Because it's the same way for me. It's like to that question, do you feel like any suffering come your way? There's some that if it comes again, it's like, yeah, we'll do that really well. But there's a kind that it can go specifically after the things that I most have my heart tied up in. And I wouldn't make it. Like I would go live under. There are things that I could lose that I think I would probably just go crazy if that happened, or I'd go live under a bridge for a while, or I'd And so I think but that's part of the wisdom is to say, I've kind of done the work to know what are the things that I most want to defend in my life. And it's the things I most want to defend that are probably most competing with God for where He and He alone should be in my heart. Yeah. And that's tough.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, some people don't suffer well. And I think of this new badge of honor that we live in, that in victimhood, right? In our culture, it's a badge of honor to talk about how hard it is and how bad we have it, and we don't have this and we don't have that. Maybe just like some thoughts on that, like what victimhood, what that actually does reflect.
Yeah. There's a quote, I don't know who originally said it, but we've talked about it a lot at our church. Pain that does not transform you gets transmitted from you. And so the more cliche way to say that is hurting people hurt people, which is just true. It's super cliche, but it's really true. And I think that there are two ways to err, and this is an oversimplification, but for the sufferer, you can either ignore your suffering or you can idolize your suffering. If you ignore your suffering, it means you minimize it. You say it doesn't hurt like it actually does. Whereas Jesus is going to say in Matthew 5, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And so there's something good and godly about agreeing with God about pain. So I think as we've talked about it, what I wouldn't want somebody to think, okay, God is just this kind of cold, apathetic, like deity in the sky who's sending pain your way to make you a better person. That's not true, because there is a way that God uses suffering to make us look more like Jesus, but there's also a way in which God joins us in our suffering, and He will share our emotion in that. That's what you see Jesus do. It's why Jesus, when He loses one of His closest friends, He knows He's going to raise Lazarus from the dead, but He still takes time to weep and to cry before He goes and brings him back to life, because suffering's painful. Yeah. So God there is no badge in, I think especially there's a kind of culture that exists that's like toughen up, the man, this generation wouldn't have survived a war, and that kind of, and that might be true. That probably is, that probably is true. Right. Yeah. But, I think that there's a way to minimize, to ignore suffering. Yeah. In suffering that we ignore, pain that we talked about this yesterday morning at church, actually, the pain that we ignore, it does not go away. It just comes out in ways that we can't control, because pain either transforms you or it gets transmitted from you. The other end of that, though, is to idolize the suffering, which is what you're talking about. And that's when you start to become really judgmental. Like your experience has been harder than anyone else's experience. And what happens for those who have suffered and they idolize their suffering, they become uncorrectable and they become unteachable, because any amount of correction or teaching makes them feel re-victimized. It makes them feel as if they are somebody's trying to bring them back into that kind of pain. And so the middle ground of that, right, to because one, it's not true. There are plenty of people that have gone through plenty of really, really difficult things in life, and also you don't get healed. The biggest problem is when you idolize your suffering or your pain. There's no healing in that, because then you so associate who you are with that pain that if that pain goes away or if that pain heals, you don't know who you are anymore. Yeah. And so you will hold on to it as a way to, because you've so constructed your identity around it. The middle ground of that is to, there is a artist, I don't know his name, but he's really popular for what's called, the art is called Consugi Art. And what it is it's a way of making, the only way I've seen it is a way of making like bowls, like these beautiful glass bowls. And what happens is they will take broken glass or broken other material, and they will actually use gold to fuse it back together. Have you seen this?
I've seen, yeah.
Yeah. And so you have this bowl, and it's got all these cracks in it, but it's fused together, and it's held together by gold. And the idea is it's at those very places of brokenness that the bowl has become most beautiful, because it's the gold that has brought it back together. And I think that's what God does with us when we suffer, is he doesn't take all the signs away that something hurt us, but it's at those very places of pain and suffering that we have an opportunity for the most beauty to come out of our lives. And that is the story of Christianity, that Jesus was wounded, and out of his wounds we are healed, that Jesus was murdered and executed, and his death became resurrection. We're about to celebrate that in a couple weeks. And I think that's the unique thing that God will do with those who don't ignore their suffering over here. They don't idolize their suffering over here, but they come to God with it, and they trust God with it, and they allow God to be the one that heals. And out of that, it'll transform us and make us people that I don't think we could become had we never been through what we've been through.
So last night, Dr. Brian Loritz spoke. We hosted something at the house for a ministry that Tiff and I are involved with.
Nice.
And
TFTI. That means thanks for the invite.
Oh yeah. I invited Michael instead. So worship leader.
That was the better choice.
But he talked about. We talked about identity last night. It was a bunch of former players, something that the athletes struggle with, and we talk about it quite a bit. And one of the things that he said is we have a full-time prosecuting attorney in our head.
Yes.
Constantly, we're talking down to ourselves, telling us what we did wrong, how we're not good enough. So in the midst of trial, in the midst of suffering, I mean, what are some things that help if you're talking with someone, counseling somebody, that help to say, hey, I've got to recognize where I am in this moment and to realign my perspective so I don't go down, the ignoring or idolization of suffering. Mm-hmm. So how can you just, again, listen to the voice, and what voice to listen to in those times?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to pay attention to what you're believing about God in that moment. Because so much of our thoughts about ourselves are ultimately rooted in what we think about God. And I think the most common reaction if life is really hard is to think God is punishing me, which is interesting because we tend to give ourselves credit when things go well, and then we tend to blame God when things go poorly.
Yeah.
So when life's going really well, we look in the mirror. When life's going poorly, we look at the sky. But I think so. If life is going poorly, if life is really difficult, the most important thing to pay attention to is, what do I believe about God? Is this punishment? Because if it's punishment, then the place I need to go for comfort and consolation, the thing I need to know if I'm suffering, is that it has a purpose. That I have seen people endure just the most unspeakable things, and they can endure the unspeakable if they believe there's meaning in it, if they believe there's purpose in it. And then I have seen people unable to endure much lighter suffering because they thought it was all pointless, because they thought it didn't, because the thing that mattered most to them, the suffering took away, and with that suffering their meaning went away as well. And so you see this in the Christians who survived the Holocaust. There's I'm going to butcher it, the name and the study and all that, but basically it was these Christians who came out of and survived the Holocaust, and basically the ones who were able to endure all of the kind of atrocities that happened there were the ones that kind of kept that daily conversation, communication with God open, the ones who believed that that somehow, some way God was going to use this. The
name was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Is that who you're thinking of?
Well, he is one. Yeah, he's definitely one of them. But yeah, the idea that the whole Joseph story, that what man meant for evil, God meant for good, and all that. But when you lose that sense of purpose, you really can't endure anything, even if it's maybe more, I guess, light suffering. But so I think the most important thing for your own soul health and mental health in that is what you believe about God. I think I compare it to this. It's like the son who is asked by the father to do a really hard thing. If that son's experience of the father is cruel, then the hard thing will feel like cruelty. He will interpret what he's being asked to do through the lens of what he believes to be true about his dad. I've got a really good dad, a really godly father, and there are hard things that he asked me to do when I was in his home, or things that I felt like were hard. And yet there was a stamina for the difficult because I believed he loved me. Yeah. And even if I didn't understand, even if I didn't agree with if it was just like yard work or something, silly, or even if it was a lot of, even if rules I didn't understand or anything like that, when I couldn't make sense of what he was asking, I could still make sense of who I believed him to be and interpret the moment through that, Mm-hmm. And so for those who are going through difficulty, the most important thing is, I might not be able to make sense of this, but I have a Father in heaven whose heart is good. Mm-hmm. And one day all the confusion, the things that I'm not sure about, all that will be clear, Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. This may answer what I was about to ask you, or that answer you just said. 2022 is a wild time to be in history, because we're coming out of an event that literally affected everybody, mm-hmm. like nothing else ever did. And now we've got war on the other side of the world. Mm. We've got, political unrest here at home, divided, and social media is contributing to that. How are you encouraging people to be wise with all that going on? You kind of answered it a second ago, but there's just so many things competing in our minds that we're all going through together. How do we stay out of that dark tunnel that the world's throwing at us right now?
Yeah. One of the reasons why I wanted to do the wisdom series at our church is because the two predominant cultural emotions that I think we all see are fear and anger. Mm-hmm. And it's fear in a way that's like paralyzing, and it's anger in a way that's explosive. Mm-hmm. And so whether that's the way that people talk to each other, whether that's, I think that there were so many things tied up in the last 2 years, so many of them unexpected. And so the fear comes from, hey, I have been conditioned to believe that there is something coming around the corner that's going to. I remember the first time I was in Colorado. I rented a car and we were driving somewhere, and I'd never been in the mountains before, and I'm driving in the mountains, and I see the signs that say falling rock or like beware of falling rock. And I did not know that was normal. I thought like there had to have been some sort of condition. And so I was like so anxious, and I just expected these like mountain-sized boulders to fall from the sky. And they didn't, because it's not normal for the rocks to just, they have those there. But I think that right now what's happening is a lot of people are living life like that it's just like they just saw the sign and they're like, oh my gosh, rocks fall from the sky. And so they're driving their lives with that expectation. The other end of that, the anger end of that is we've all felt a sense of a loss of control. The world is not what we thought it was. And the way, instead of acknowledging that, instead of maybe even grieving that in a way, you can try to recapture control by way of anger and rage. In a lot of ways, that's why people are so mad at each other, that there was something about life that was threatened. And so now everybody has an enemy. Everybody has an other. Everybody has in their mind the person that is, they are what's wrong with the world. And there's two things that happen if I live my life like that they are what's wrong with the world. One, I get to feel really good about me. And then two, I have an outlet for all of my anger, and it's them. And so to answer your question, if that's the moment that we live in, it's fear and it's rage. It's fear over, oh no, what's coming next? The rocks are falling. Or it's rage at that person's what's wrong. Christianity offers an answer to both of those. To the afraid, Christianity says there's a God who's in control of all things. And Romans 8 says he causes all things to work to the good of those who love him. So we don't have to know of the rocks that are falling or might never come. It can be enough for us that we know that God knows those things. And for the rage, Christianity says love your enemy. Jesus says, you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor, but I say to you, love your enemy. Do good to those who persecute you. And I think this is the feature of wisdom that is most needed right now. It's not, wisdom is not information. We all know people who are really good with information and really bad at life. We all know people who know the same amount of things and their lives look very different. And so what is it? It's not, the problem for so many is not that they're lacking answers, they're lacking information. It's that they haven't been changed by what they know. They haven't been changed by the information that they have. And so it's not flashy. It's not even necessarily motivating or encouraging, but the way forward in this world is really to believe the words of Jesus and to believe that the thing that I most need to navigate this world is I need to change. I need character development. The other thing we talk about with wisdom at our church is wisdom has a posture, it's low, and wisdom has a pace, it's slow. We grow wise over time.
Yes.
In an immediate download culture, that's really, really hard. Yeah. We are used to, I think I told the story of we were trying to download something on the Apple TV, and it was, the download screen popped up, and it said something like 20% downloaded, 15 minutes remaining. And my son, he's 11, goes, 15 minutes? It's like, come on, And it's like...
Do you know how long it took to drive to Blockbuster?
Exactly, yes.
And then the hour there to pick out the movie?
And then when you put the movie in and it starts like halfway because...
Then you got to rewind it?
Come on.
Ben, do you remember those days?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay,
Oh, yeah. I used to go in 7th grade, I used to go to the local video store and get WWE videos.
Oh, yeah, you look like awesome. A WWE guy. That doesn't surprise me.
I was all into that in middle school.
And then would you act it out in your backyard?
Of course, of course.
Throw someone on a table or something? That's
absolutely.
Awesome. But yeah, so that's kind of the climate of the culture right now. 15 minutes, know?
Yeah.
And wisdom takes time.
I love that point because you're exactly right. There's no shortcut. Mm-hmm. You can listen to wise people and counsel and be encouraged by wise people, but it's still going to take time to truly develop it.
Because change takes time.
Right.
Yeah. And like you said, you can have the information, but if that information doesn't change you, I mean, I love that. Like that is a depiction of wisdom, is you're letting the information, the truth,
yes,
the best that we know, the truth change you.
Right.
What besides the church and besides the Bible, what are some sources you look to? Again, we know it takes time, but what are some resources that you like to go to for wisdom?
Netflix.
There you go.
Netflix, YouTube, Instagram.
Yeah, I think that what's interesting is Proverbs answers that question. So Proverbs chapter 6 is talking to a type of fool called the sluggard, and it tells the sluggard, look to the ant. In other words, the sluggard is the person who idolizes comfort, and so they struggle to work hard, or they have these small compromises in their life. And what the author of Proverbs says is, look to the ant. The ant works really hard. The ant gathers, they do these things. There's like a long, boring discipline to the ant's life, because what they don't believe is they don't believe that they can, they don't believe that they're exempt from the ways and the order within which God made his world. You have to work hard to eat. You have to work hard to survive, right? And so there is that, like the outside of the Bible, the next kind of place is just God's creation, to just observe in God's creation how he made the world to work, right? Talking about wisdom being slow, God has in his creation wired his creation to grow slowly. You plant a tree, right now it's like right at the beginning of spring, and we just planted some different things in our yard or whatever, and it's like you don't watch plants. You just don't sit and watch a plant grow, because its growth is so like incremental and slow, right? And so, unless it's a weed, I guess those grow pretty fast. But we came full circle back to mowing the lawn.
Right.
Yeah,
That's right. Dude, you've done this before. Yeah. Land the plane.
Yeah. So I think being in creation, understanding that creation has a purpose, there's beauty to it. And even in the Bible will look to creation and say, learn from it. God's kind of wired his fingerprints in it for you to learn things about him in that way. And then two, I think this is not true for everyone. But as a young leader, I need older people in my life. If you grow wise over time, if wisdom's pace is slow, there's probably not a whole lot of wise 21-year-olds. Mm-hmm. There might be some that are on their way to wisdom, and if you're 21, God bless you and keep you. But I want to look to and learn from the guy or lady in their 60s or 70s. That one of the most encouraging moments I had during kind of the height of some of the difficulty we walked through is I got to spend a couple hours with a pastor who's in his 70s. He just retired from ministry, and he finished really well, and he's using the last chapter of his life to just encourage younger pastors. That's what he wants to do with his life. And he just said things to me during that time, just imparted wisdom, and none of it was, I'd heard all of it before, really. I've encountered all that before, but because it came from him, and because it came from a mouth that had the backing of 70 years well lived, it just mattered more. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think spending time. Now, not everyone who's 70 is wise. Sure. Some people being 70 means they've had 70 years to practice foolishness, and that comes out of their life. But those who were on the path of wisdom and stayed on the path of wisdom, and wisdom slowly grew in their life over time, there's a lot to learn from the decade ahead of me, 2 decades ahead of me, 3 decades ahead of me.
Yeah, we talked about this in the first episode. For generations of time, we've lived with all age groups. Yeah. And you're in the same tribe as an 80-year-old and a 3-year-old, and everybody's together, and you're seeing each other every day. Now, we've separated from that. We stick our old people in a home for them to die, and we just go about living our lives. Mm-hmm. And so you're right. I'm not around older people very much throughout the course of my day. I have to seek it out now. Mm-hmm. It's not just natural.
And I think we're in a time too where we discredit the older generation as well. Like, you don't know what it's like now. Yeah. You're disconnected. Your world is gone. Yeah. What you know doesn't apply. But that it couldn't be further from the truth. We
are living at a time, and it might be the first time in human history, where new is better.
Yeah.
And that hasn't always been the case. It used to be that unless it has age to it, it's not quite. And so I even think, to your point, you know, those who are older, they get discredited because they're not as proficient in the things we value most.
Sure.
If they don't know how to use the newest iPhone, or they don't know they haven't watched the latest meme or whatever, right? And it's there's something about that that's easy to dismiss. Yeah. But I think even in that, what's exposed is how backwards our values are, right? Where it's like, again, you can be great with technology and bad at life. Mm-hmm. You can be well versed in the, you know, cultural conversations and all the arguments and all that, and yet bad at life. Yeah.
Yeah, the three of us, essentially, because the three of us, you know, 20, 30 years from now, will be looked up to by that generation. Now, the technology is going to keep advancing, and they're going to go through different, but we're really the first group to go through this technological age.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of the guinea pigs of this age. We're making a lot of mistakes, and that's natural and that's normal. But those of us that are trying to gain wisdom through this, that's the encouraging part about it, is what we can pass along.
Yeah.
Because, yes, while I agree, like, they don't know what it's like, and that may not be the right mentality, but on the one hand, they don't know exactly what it's like to go through such a technological age. Now, there's things that they went through that we can learn from, absolutely. But what we're going through right now, somebody's going to look up to in 30 years and be like, they went through that. They went through the beginning of this age. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what did they learn?
And I agree, but what Jamin said was where our values are. Like, our values are on professional success. Our values are on social media. Our values are on technology. Our values are on, like, what I want now. Regardless, there's still marriages. Mm-hmm. There's still parenthood. There's still loss. There's still friendships, other relationships. There's still leadership. There's still all of these things that are timeless lessons that they have gone through. Whether they failed at them or they've been successful at them or both, that doesn't change. The foundational principles in life that I would say are important, right? Like faith, family, leadership, those things, that will not ever go away. Hopefully, will not ever go away. Mm-hmm. So again, we're discrediting them for not being up to date or up to speed with the less important items in our life.
Sure, yeah, that's a good point.
And I would just, my encouragement for, you know, what you're 18. I mean, I think it's normal from like 16 to 22 just to look at old people and be like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And then you turn 25 and you're like, okay, you actually did know what you're talking about. Like some of those things you shared with me. But my hope is that you'll find someone, again, not every person, you know, with a bigger number associated with their age is wise, but find someone that you can, you know, get mentored by, do life with, shadow, whatever it is, whether it's professionally, whether it's personally, because there are things that the older generations have gone through, experienced, endured, lost to, won against, that can absolutely help you do life, not hobbies, not work, not how you spend your time scrolling on your phone, but do life, real life.
Amen.
Maybe one way to ask it would be what kinds of conversations do I want my grandkids to trust me with? And by the time that if God gives me the years, by the time that I have grandkids, what I think is probably true is technology will have advanced. I'll be the guy that's like, I don't know how to work. It's like, I can't help you with your spaceship.
Give me the big numbers on the remote.
Yeah, exactly. They'll be like, Grandpa, why are your texts so big? You know, your letters. And it's like, I'm okay with that. I think I'm okay. Even I think I'm okay if they're not coming and saying, you know, Grandpa, weigh in on the latest like argument or thing happening. But I do want them to come and say, hey, how do I make a marriage work? You know? What does it look like to spend time with God? What's the most important thing to look for when choosing a church? How do I raise kids? You know, how do I suffer well? Those are the kinds of conversations that I hope that they trust me with. And I think I'm resigned that a lot of life will probably kind of pass me by, and there will be a lot of it that I feel behind in. But it's like if there's a day where they're like late teens, early 20s, they come over, we sit on the back porch, and they trust me with some of the deeper things in life, that will be a huge win, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. And that's one of the things the book talks about is discernment. When to be able to say no and recognize, like, I can't be everything to everybody, because if we try that, we are paper thin in depth.
Yeah.
And I think wisdom comes with very, very deep-rooted experience and knowledge and passion in those things. And recognize, look, I'm not going to know everything about everything. And I can't, and be okay with that, and be able to say no to certain things because that doesn't align with what I want to be able to have conversations with my grandkids about. Like, and figuring that out. But I don't know if we even ask ourselves those things.
Yeah.
If we ever stop and say, okay, what is really, truly important to me? And what can I really pour my time, effort, and treasures into? We just don't. It's like we're at the mercy of everyone else all the time because we just don't stop and say, all right, where do I need to go deep?
Yeah.
Because what's important?
Yeah. Yeah. So, Jamin, somebody's listening to this and they loved what you had to say today. They loved your encouragement, your wisdom. Where can people find you? How can they get connected with you? Where can they learn more about you?
Yeah, so I preach almost every week at Citizens Church in Plano. And so citizenschurch.com is our website, and sermons are there. If you live in or around Plano and you're looking for a church home, we'd love to see you at 9 or 11:15 on a Sunday morning.
Nice.
If you don't, then there's a lot of wisdom out there.
Well, y'all probably do online.
We do
service,
online.
I imagine.
That's right. Yeah.
So if you're not here in Texas, not here in
live
Dallas,
services
plug
on YouTube.
Yep.
There's a couple Citizens churches out there, but the logo's a crown.
Yep.
So if you're looking for the logo, that on YouTube live, and it's live with the service times that Jamin mentioned. But you guys keep the sermons posted.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
That's right.
All right.
So they're on the website. There's podcast Citizens Church in Plano.
Yeah.
That's that one, because you're right.
And there's and one of the things that the book talks about is just community, and we talked about it is the church and being around people, gaining wisdom from those that are moving in the same direction or are rooted in the same foundational beliefs, and just being encouraged by each other. There's wisdom in community, and Tiffany and I, just being in the community at Citizens and with Jamin, we have benefited tremendously from that, and in turn, our kids hopefully will have benefited from it. So I would highly encourage, if you're in the DFW area, if you're not, I mean, we've got people all over that are listening, check it out. But I would also highly encourage just connecting to a community.
Yeah,
and
sure.
And the church is the best place to go. And again, I want to be very clear too, right? Like, the church, people have had bad experiences. People have been hurt. And my hope is that you endure and recognize, look, you're hurt from people. It's not God that hurts you.
Yeah, for sure.
It's people. So just encourage that, like, look, if I know the church, I'm never going back. They did this to me and they're hypocrites. Yeah, we are hypocrites. People are hypocrites, and nobody's perfect. But I just encourage not to do life isolated.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So
awesome.
and we appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for coming,
I love you,
Jamin.
brother.
Thanks for having me, guys.
This is fun. We're gonna do this again because there's a whole lot more that we can unpack. But we really appreciate it. Thank you for listening. If you found any value in today, please share. Again, just
it would be wise of you to share.
It would be very wise. So share with a friend, share with a family member, share with a colleague, because there's some really important things that Jamin hit on today. And one thing I love about Jamin is just the illustrations he uses just to make it make sense. And there's a lot that we can gather from today. So please share. If you have any comments, please feel free. We are always looking for constructive criticism, acknowledgments. If there's a topic that you want us to discuss, let us know. We love that. But we appreciate you, and we will see you
next week
on the morrow.
Thanks, guys.